A locksmith's workshop on the top floor of the palace at Versailles. Filing, hammering, oil on his hands. The King of France is up there most mornings.
Meanwhile, 3 floors down, the finance minister is doing arithmetic that says the state has about 6 weeks of money left.
And outside the gates in Paris, a working man is spending something like 88% of his daily wage on bread, just bread.
And the king is upstairs, filing a lock, because it's the one part of the job where the pieces actually fit together.
Louis XVI, the man who lost the oldest monarchy in Europe and who by every account was one of the least malicious people in the building.
That's what makes this one so uncomfortable. There's no villain at the center of it. There's a shy, well-meaning man being asked to do something he was constitutionally incapable of doing.
Which was to say no to someone, anyone, ever.
And in a system where the king's word was the only thing that could break a deadlock, a king who couldn't decide wasn't a mild problem. He was the problem.
So take us back. Where does he start?
He becomes king in 1774, at 19. He's the grandson of Louis XV. His father died young, so he skips a generation.
And he inherits a country that is genuinely one of the richest and most powerful in Europe. This is important. France in 1774 is not a failing state.
Enormous population, the biggest in Western Europe. Dominant culture, dominant language of diplomacy, serious army.
And a tax system designed by nobody over 400 years in which the people with the most money paid the least.
That's the whole crisis in one sentence, honestly. France wasn't poor. The French state was broke because it couldn't tax the wealthy.
Nobility and clergy held huge privileges and exemptions, so the burden lands on the third estate, which is everyone else, about 98% of the country.
And the tax collection itself was farmed out to private contractors who kept a cut. So the state paid a premium to collect a tax that missed the rich.
Now add the marriage, because that becomes a political problem in its own right.
Marie Antoinette, Austrian Archduchess, daughter of Maria Theresa, married to him in 1770 when she's 14 and he's 15.
And France and Austria had been enemies for 200 years before that alliance, so to a lot of Parisians, she's not the queen, she's the Austrian woman.
There's a nickname, l'Autrichienne, which is a pun. It's the Austrian woman, and the last part of it also means dog.
Charming.
And the marriage didn't produce an heir for 7 years, which in a monarchy is a public matter discussed in pornographic pamphlets sold openly on the streets of Paris.
The pamphlet culture is genuinely underrated in how this ends. Years of printed filth about the queen, and by 1789, a lot of people believe it as fact.
Now the decision that actually breaks the finances, the American Revolution.
France backs the American colonists against Britain. Money, ships, troops, Lafayette, the fleet at Yorktown.
And it works. Britain loses 13 colonies. Strategically, it's a genuine French victory.
And it costs somewhere north of $1 billion livres, funded almost entirely by borrowing because they couldn't raise taxes.
By the late 1780s, roughly half of all government spending is going on debt service. Interest. Not soldiers, not roads. Interest.
And there's a bitter irony in it. France goes bankrupt funding a revolution about representation and taxation.
And the officers who came back from America came back with ideas. Lafayette is standing in Paris in 1789, having personally watched a people write themselves a constitution.
So the finance ministers cycle through. Turgot, who wants real reform, gets pushed out. Necker, who's a Swiss banker and a genius at public relations.
Necker publishes the Compte Rendu in 1781, the first time the royal accounts had ever been made public.
And he fudges it. He presents a surplus by leaving the war costs off the books.
So the public now believes the treasury is fine. Which means when the government later says, we're desperate, we need new taxes, nobody believes them.
He'd spent the state's last asset, not money, credibility.
Then, 1787. Louis calls an assembly of notables, hand-picked nobles and clergy, and asks them to accept a land tax that would apply to everyone.
And they refuse. They say only the Estates General can approve something that big.
Which is a brilliant piece of self-interested obstruction, because the Estates General hadn't met since 1614, 175 years.
They thought they were protecting their privileges. They were opening the door for the people who'd abolish them.
And then nature intervenes. July 1788, a hailstorm rips through the grain belt north of Paris, hailstones that killed livestock in the fields.
Harvests destroyed. Then the winter of 1788 to 89 is one of the coldest anyone can remember. Rivers freeze, mills can't turn.
So by the spring of 1789, bread prices hit their highest point of the century, in a country where bread is most of what poor people eat.
A bankrupt state and a hungry capital in the same season.
The Estates General opens at Versailles in May 1789, and immediately you get the procedural fight that becomes the revolution.
Because of how they vote, 3 estates, clergy, nobility, and everyone else, each estate gets 1 vote as a block.
Which means the first 2 can always outvote the third, 2-1, forever, even though the third represents 98% of France.
The third estate demands voting by head instead of by order, and the king, this is the crucial bit, dithers for 6 weeks.
He doesn't say no, he doesn't say yes. He lets it sit while the deputies talk to each other and radicalize.
On the 17th of July, the Third Estate stops asking. They declare themselves the National Assembly, the legitimate representatives of the nation.
The king has their meeting hall locked, officially for repairs.
So they walk down the road to an indoor tennis court and swear not to disband until France has a constitution.
And that's sovereignty changing hands, not with an army, with 600 men in a tennis court refusing to go home.
And Louis's response is the pattern that destroys him. He resists, then concedes, then quietly moves troops toward Paris.
Which is the worst of both. He gives the reformers what they want, so they know pressure works, and then he frightens them, so they know he can't be trusted.
On the 11th of July, he dismisses Necker, who's popular with the crowds. 3 days later, the Bastille.
And people should know what the Bastille actually was that day. A fortress prison holding 7 prisoners, 4 forgers, 2 lunatics, and 1 aristocrat.
The crowd wasn't there to free them, they were there for the gunpowder. They'd already taken thousands of muskets from the Invalides and had nothing to load them with.
The governor eventually surrenders, and he's killed anyway, and his head goes on a pike through the streets.
And that night at Versailles, there's the exchange people always quote. The king asks whether this is a revolt.
And the duke tells him, "No, sire, it's a revolution."
And what's remarkable is that Louis had written in his hunting diary that day the single word, nothing, because he hadn't caught anything.
Which people love to use as proof he was an idiot. It's not fair. It was a hunting log, that's what the word meant in it. But as an accidental summary of his political attention, it's hard to beat.
After the Bastille, it moves fast. The great fear rolls through the countryside, peasants burning the documents that recorded their feudal obligations.
Smart target, actually. Burn the paperwork and the obligation becomes unenforceable.
On the 4th of August, the Assembly abolishes feudal privilege in one all-night session, nobles standing up and renouncing their own rights.
Some of that is genuine enthusiasm, and some is reading the room while the barns burn. Then the Declaration of the Rights of Man on the 26th.
And in October, the women of Paris march to Versailles, thousands of them, in the rain, over 12 miles, because there's no bread.
And they don't go home. They bring the royal family back to Paris with them, to the Tuileries Palace.
The baker, the baker's wife, and the baker's boy. That's what the crowd chanted about them on the road back.
And that's the end of Versailles as a political fact. From that day, the king lives inside the city that is deciding his future.
Now, could he have survived at that point? Genuinely?
Yes, absolutely yes. In 1790, there is enormous goodwill toward a constitutional monarchy with Louis at the head of it. Most deputies want him.
Then he throws it away in a single night, June 1791, the flight to Varennes.
The family disguises itself, gets into an enormous slow carriage, which is its own comedy of bad planning, and runs for the eastern frontier.
Toward loyal troops and, beyond them, Austrian support, and he leaves behind a written declaration denouncing everything he'd agreed to.
In writing, signed. That's the part that hangs him later.
They're stopped at Varennes, short of the border. The story is that a postmaster recognized the king's face from a banknote.
And they're brought back to Paris through silent crowds. Nobody cheered, nobody jeered. Men were told to keep their hats on as an insult.
Silence from 100,000 people. That's worse than shouting.
And now the argument has changed completely. Before Varenne, he was a king being reformed. After Varenne, he's a man who tried to run away and come back with a foreign army.
He signs the Constitution in September 1791 anyway, constitutional monarch, but nobody believes a word of it.
Then war. April 1792, France declares war on Austria, and both sides secretly want it for opposite reasons.
The revolutionaries think a war will expose the traitors at home. The court thinks defeat will bring foreign armies to restore royal power.
The King of France was hoping his own country would lose, and a lot of people suspected exactly that.
Then, the Brunswick Manifesto, July 1792. The commander of the Austrian and Prussian forces warns Paris that if the royal family is harmed, the city will face total destruction.
Which was meant to protect them. It's the most counterproductive document of the entire revolution.
Because Paris reads it as proof the king is in league with the invaders. On the 10th of August, the crowds storm the Tuileries.
The Swiss Guard fights and is massacred. Hundreds of them. The royal family is taken into custody. The monarchy is abolished the following month.
And then in November, they find the Armoire de Fer, an iron chest hidden in a wall of the palace.
Full of his correspondence, payments to counter-revolutionaries, contacts with foreign courts, evidence of the double game in his own hand.
The trial is in December. He's called Citizen Louis Capet. He defends himself calmly and honestly, with more dignity than he'd governed with.
And the vote on guilt is unanimous, effectively. The vote on the penalty is not.
It's agonizingly close. Death without conditions passes by a margin of 1 vote in the count that mattered, 361 to 360.
And among the men who voted for death was his own cousin, who'd renamed himself Philippe Égalité,
who went to the same guillotine 10 months later.
The 21st of January, 1793, Place de la Révolution. He tries to address the crowd, and the drums are ordered to drown him out.
He got a few words out, that he was innocent and that he forgave those responsible.
And the aftermath is the terror, and then 23 years of war across Europe, and eventually an emperor with a Corsican accent.
Marie Antoinette follows him in October. Their son dies in prison at 10.
So what's the verdict? Because I don't think he was stupid. He read widely, he knew geography and science, he could discuss shipbuilding in detail.
He wasn't stupid. He was indecisive in a job where the whole machine waited on his decision.
And here's the moral. He gave away everything the revolution demanded, but always 6 months late and always under duress.
Which meant every concession looked like weakness instead of leadership and bought him nothing.
A reform granted early is a gift. The same reform granted late is a surrender, and nobody thanks you for a surrender.
This was History But Better Podcast, Episode 2.